Coming up, the Johnson County Sheriff's unflinching announcement on guns stuns many. Sporting KC gets stung with more bad PR. The Kansas City man who gets more national FaceTime than anyone else this week. And the field is finally set on the candidates to replace Joe Reardon as mayor of Wyandotte County. Those stories and more this half hour. Hello, everyone. I'm Nick Haynes. Delighted you've chosen to be with us this half hour as we connect the dots on the big stories of the week. Dissecting those headlines, the Star's chief investigative reporter, Steve Kraske, whose job also keeps you up to date, weekdays at 11 on KCUR-FM. Freelance reporter Sam Zeff, now joining the KCPT team on in-depth news assignments as part of our expanding journalistic coverage. The Kansas City Star's nationally syndicated columnist, Mary Sanchez, and Star reporter, columnist, and blogger, Dave Helling. Now, the Johnson County Sheriff stunned many people in this community over the last few days with an unflinching announcement. Sheriff Frank Denning posts a notice on the front page of his website saying he will oppose any federal gun control laws, including limits on high-capacity magazines. Even in our national grief, we must adhere to reason and logic, he writes. Logic dictates to us that armed individuals, whether armed private individuals or hired security personnel, are the answer to prevent future tragedies in those places that we have inadvertently made free fire zones with the totally useless no guns allowed signs, he says. But what triggered Frank Denning's decision to speak out so assertively about this 4 years before he faces re-election?
No one knows, which is why there's a deathly silence around the table, because it isn't completely clear why he would take this stand at this time, other than Johnson County is a fairly conservative place, and that other sheriffs around the nation, including some in Missouri, as we'll talk about here in a minute, have made similar statements. So he might have felt, just as a personal matter, compelled to make some sort of public statement about his feelings about what's going on in Washington.
But the National Sheriff's Association hasn't taken this stand, has it, Sam?
No, not at all. In fact, right after the Obama news conference where he talked about these executive orders and going after an assault weapon ban and what have you, National Sheriff's Association did. It was tepid, but they did come out and say, yeah, we can agree with this. Now, where he's really out of step is with the International Association of Chiefs of Police, which has been backing an assault weapons ban and a ban on high-capacity mags for many, many, many years. So he's generally out of step with his peers, except when a handful of Missouri sheriffs.
He must be feeling, though, somehow that if he didn't do something more publicly, that somebody's going to be standing for against him at the next election, Steve?
Well, that's possible, and keep in mind, Nick, we live here in the heartland, very conservative territory, gun control measures, by and large, not very popular. I've noticed over the years in covering politicians, particularly those who run for law enforcement kinds of jobs, those individuals in our area almost can't be, pro-gun strongly enough and anti-crime strongly enough. You've got to be for the death penalty if you run for Attorney General in either Missouri or Kansas. Taking those kinds of strong stands are what these guys do to ensure that they get elected.
But this wasn't just any statement saying, well, I don't think if we had made these decisions with regards to gun control, that they would have prevented the accident, the massacre rather, in Sandy Hook. This is a complete statement saying that I would not accept any of these particular measures.
You're going to start to hear more and more of this sort of outcry. I think sheriffs is where you're going to hear a lot of it. You're already starting to hear CNN was reporting some other places in South Carolina this morning, just the same sort of statement. It's a very, I want to be the Sheriff Joe Arpaio of the Midwest sort of statement. Fine, let him do that. Where I really disagree is when you have someone who is a sheriff who is promoting those ideas about the fallacies of the gun-free zones. That just doesn't make any sense. I mean, if you look at, go ask Gabrielle Giffords, down there in Arizona, where there was guns everywhere, he's claiming that the reasons why these people go to schools and the gun-free zones to do these mass shootings is because they're gun-free zones. Well, it doesn't play out. I mean, and that's the part of this message that is just nonsense. I mean, there was a man down there with Gabrielle Giffords that had a gun and that almost shot the guy who got the gun away from I forget what his name now is, but Loughner. You know, that's the problem with this. If he wants to get up and do the little pomp and circumstance and, you know, gather more people around because, you know, he's saying the things that they want to hear, fine. But don't use your office to promote these things that are pure fantasy.
What is really interesting about this also, this is a sheriff that has been very progressive in regards to other kinds of decisions, including being very progressive in the area of mental health. Spending an awful lot of resources in that area, Sam.
Yes, no, absolutely. We talked to him for the Medicaid piece that was on the local show a couple of weeks ago, and we were in the jail. In fact, you've seen some of the video here. And he does run a very progressive jail, which is why I was surprised to see him come out with this really four-square pro-Second Amendment anti-gun regulation screed on his website. Now, you know, his brother is a member, a very conservative member of the Kansas State Senate. You know, I don't know what all the politics are. You guys probably understand that better than I. But I don't think of him as being that conservative where he wants to, he just doesn't want to enforce gun laws. I found that very surprising.
You know, we should point out that Johnson County is not really a hotbed of violent crime activity. There aren't a lot of murders, certainly not a lot of gun murders. So it may be that the sheriff felt a little safer in making a statement like this than, say, the sheriff of Jackson County might, where gun violence is a reality almost on a daily basis. But it is not, let me just say, it is not completely out of the realm of thought for law enforcement officials to issue opinions on things like this. 6 years ago, I did a story. Kansas City passed an ordinance on panhandling, to restrict panhandling and begging in the streets. And the chief of police at the time, Jim Corwin, put out a statement that he wouldn't enforce it because he thought it was unconstitutional. So law enforcement people have discretion in this, in arenas like this, and I think that's what Frank Denning was exercising.
Well, let's talk about this a little bit more, because we have two Missouri sheriffs announcing this week they will not enforce federal gun control laws in their counties. The newly elected Republican sheriff of Osage County, Michael Dixon, says he will refuse to enforce any law aimed at blocking the purchase, possession, and use of firearms for law-abiding Americans. Joining him in that position is the sheriff of Johnson County, Missouri, which is centered on Warrensburg. Sheriff Charlie Heiss says to do so would be tantamount to an all-out assault on the United States Constitution. Can they do that?
Well, again, I mean, my argument is that law enforcement, obviously there's a supremacy clause. Federal laws take precedent over state laws. But law enforcement officials have wide discretion across a range of issues in terms of what they do or do not do when they enforce the laws, and this may fall into that as well.
What they choose to emphasize, you know, any leader of an organization can say, my organization's going to go here, we're not going to spend much time over there. It's the same kind of thing here, absolutely.
Let me just say that you know, they are elected officials, and in Missouri, if they fail to do their job, they can be impeached. I was doing a little background research on this, there was a sheriff back in 1926 who refused to enforce gambling laws, and he was impeached. Now, I mean, that process is long and it's difficult, and would it happen? Probably not. But they not only have to answer to the voters, but you know what? They have to uphold their oath, which is to uphold the Constitution of the state and the United States of America. And if they fail to do that, they can be impeached.
Now, Dave, they won't be impeached in rural Missouri or in rural Kansas for not enforcing gun laws.
Mary, Dave Helling mentioned Jim Corwin, the former police chief in Kansas City, Missouri, not enforcing a panhandling ordinance, which was during the Mark Funkhauser administration. But also Jim Corwin didn't want to enforce many of the immigration rules at that time either. Is this the same thing?
No, because
Why not?
one thing, that's partly a bit of a misunderstanding about how Corwin operated, and Forte under him has followed suit with the same policies. They work with immigration every single day, but their offices are not going out and picking people up off the street based on, oh, I hear you speaking Spanish, or you look a certain way, I think you possibly might be an illegal immigrant, let me speed call ICE. They don't do that. That's what he said he wouldn't do, which does not mean that the force does not also work with immigration quite jointly. They do, every single day. So some of that was just a bit of a misunderstanding. And then again, it is an issue of emphasis. They don't have time to be going around and picking off who is and who isn't an immigrant. I mean, it's a ridiculous policy for a police department to take.
And similarly, then, couldn't these sheriffs also say that about some of these new gun laws, which have not even been published yet, or these executive orders?
That's the argument they'll make, that they don't have time to enforce federal laws, that type of thing. Let me say quickly, one other thing for viewers to think about. Sheriffs are elected, which we've all talked about. That's why they make these statements, Nick. Sam did a story on the local show last night about electing judges. Imagine if you had a judge in a campaign saying, in essence, I'm not going to enforce gun laws because I think they're unconstitutional. Viewers should think about how politics interfaces with law enforcement functions, not just at the sheriff level, but at the judicial level as well. That's an interesting, important topic for Kansans to face in the months ahead.
Last week, Sporting Kansas City got a PR black eye amid questions that it failed to live up to its financial obligations to cancer charity Livestrong. The Livestrong name was even removed from the stadium after it was claimed the soccer club only paid $200,000 of the $1 million the company owed the charity in 2012. Now there are accusations that the club has not delivered on a big commitment it made when it took advantage of more than $230 million in state and local tax subsidies when it built the stadium in Wyandotte County. That includes no inner-city soccer fields the team pledged to build in 2010, and no 18-field youth soccer complex that was supposed to be completed last December. So what's the word from Sporting Kansas City on why this has not been built? Anyone?
I think their argument is that they're going to try, that they've made some changes. There are some things that they want to talk with the community about. The team wants to talk with the community about in terms of implementing these commitments. But the clock is ticking, and you can hear people in Wyandotte County saying, well, now, wait a minute. We'll give you a little bit of latitude, but you're going to have to do something to honor these commitments going forward.
Now, Mary, last week there seemed to be a little bit more consensus around this table that there was a little bit more of a benefit of the doubt to Sporting Kansas City because of the Lance Armstrong deal and what was happening there, and he was nosediving. Okay, but now we have a second incident here. Has the sort of consensus now changing in terms of the community, in terms of how they're viewing Sporting Kansas City now?
I don't think it changes that quick. I mean, Sporting Kansas City does still have a good name in the community. I think that is a potential black eye, though. Mike Hendricks did a great job for the Star reporting that story. And I do think, people need to, reporters and the public need to keep on Sporting Kansas City so that they come through with those commitments on those soccer fields. If they want to keep building their team spirit, that starts with those little bitty kids who have access to things like great sporting complexes.
Steve?
Yeah, I don't think it changes the club's image either, but having said that, there is a sense with this story that these soccer fields were sort of being pushed off on the back burner. The public really wasn't thinking about it as much until the bright light of public scrutiny was shined on this. I think Sporting Kansas City needs to get going here. They've missed the deadline, as you pointed out. They are saying they're looking at other sites and all good things like that, but they've missed the deadline. They need to get going, and I think you wonder how fast they'd be moving if the Star hadn't shed a light on what happened here.
Well, this will be an issue the next mayor of Wyandotte County will have to deal with now that Joe Reardon recently announced he is stepping down after years on the job. This week was the filing deadline for candidates seeking to succeed Reardon. The field is now set. It'll be one of these 5 people. Unified Government Commissioners Nathan Barnes, Mark Holland and Ann McGeer, businessman and activist Cordell Meeks Jr. and Janice Witt, who has sought other offices in recent years. Do any of them have a leg up over one another at this point, Steve?
Well, I think the field and voters are still sort of sifting through all this. This has all come upon the community much more quickly than anyone anticipated. There was a broad consensus in the community that Mayor Reardon was going to seek re-election for 4 more years. Suddenly he's not. This race is sort of just now setting itself up. But I think of the 5, the 2 names you hear the most often from insiders and sort of where this race might be going. Remember, there'll be a 2-candidate runoff, a general election then following in April to elect the new mayor. You hear mostly about Ann McGeer and Mark Holland, 2 sitting commissioners who seem to have an early leg up in this race. If that may not prove to be the case once the primary comes and goes, but that's the early sounding on this race.
Is Mayor Reardon going to be endorsing one of these candidates? Is he favoring one of these candidates?
He has not said anything publicly, and he may not. Sort of the insider buzz is that he's an ally of Mark Holland's going forward, who served on the commission with him for a number of years.
Well, actually, the buzz early on was that he waited, Joe Reardon, to make his announcement until the very end to try and clear a path for Mark Holland so that there wouldn't be a field the size that it was. And then and then the word got out, and so now you have 5 people in a primary, which complicates the picture a little bit because the turnout in a primary, particularly a spring primary, isn't very big to begin with, and then Wyandotte County. So, so whether he'll endorse Mark Holland or not is not clear. There is, though, some antipathy, I'm told, between Joe Reardon and Ann Murguia because of things that have happened on the commission over time.
You know, there is also, though, some intense interest in that county to keeping the positive momentum going. I think folks over there have lived through so many years of tough times that now that there's positive momentum going, particularly out on the western side of the county, people want to keep the good vibe going, and that begins to suggest there might be a little more interest in this primary than we might typically see.
I think there will be, and that is one reason why it is a shame that it's come about so fast, and that the primary is going to come upon people so quickly, because what they really need is the public needs those sort of forums or televised forums where they can hear each of these candidates.
Okay, we'll make a commitment on this program to bring the candidates in, and I know you will on Up to Date as well, you bet. And the Star will be doing profiles. Absolutely. Of course. Grab. Group hug. By the way, Mayor Reardon, it was 2 weeks ago on this program, was also saying he was going to be having a job. Though he wasn't willing to disclose what that job was, do we know what that job he was going to was now?
He has not said.
He still hasn't said.
We're very eager to find out what it is, Nick.
Okay. A proposal favored by some conservative Republicans to give Kansas governors and lawmakers more power over appointments to the state's appellate courts cleared a key legislative committee this week. The measure would amend the Kansas Constitution to allow governors to appoint whomever they choose to the State Court of Appeals and Supreme Court, subject to Senate confirmation. It's an issue we tackled in depth on KCPT's The Local Show last night.
In 2005, the state Supreme Court ruled Kansas wasn't spending enough money on education and ordered the legislature to come up with $290 million more. Conservative Republicans, saying the court was legislating from the bench, were furious.
I think that the thing that was motivating a lot of this was school finance.
Crystal Marquardt just retired last week from the Court of Appeals, and she agrees this proposed constitutional change is a power grab to control the future of school finance.
Why you? Why the Court of Appeals? Why now?
Because the governor, I think, believes at this point that he's got the political clout to get done what he wants to get done. And maybe he does.
But current Senate Vice President Jeff King couldn't disagree more. He says this is about more democracy and fewer lawyers.
So the criticism that this all goes back to school funding, out of play.
Can I say for sure what everyone's motivation is? I can certainly say for my own, this has nothing to do with school funding. This has nothing to do with any one case, nor should it.
Do you think that there has been scandal or infamy within the Court of Appeals or Supreme Court justices? I mean, has there been something that would say, you know what, we have to change the Constitution to make this better?
I have not personally known of any scandal or anything improper in the Court of Appeals or the Supreme Court. I think our Supreme Court justices and our Court of Appeals judges are good men and women that have done a good job.
There's little doubt a constitutional amendment to change the way appellate court judges are picked is going to pass the Kansas legislature and most likely appear on the ballot in August of next year. Setting up, former Senator John Brattle says, an expensive and ugly campaign.
No doubt in my mind that's what will happen. There will be massive amounts of money raised and spent in campaigning for and against that constitutional amendment.
Where's the money going to come from?
It's going to come from the Koch brothers in Wichita. It'll be unlike any constitutional amendment campaign that I've seen in my lifetime.
And not only Koch money, but he says millions of dollars from trial lawyers and other special interests. But Senator King says now is the time to have this debate.
My hope and belief as an elected official in the state of Kansas is that the voters of Kansas can see through the negative misinformation and get to the valid points of the issue.
A lot of definitive language in that report. This is going to be unlike any constitutional amendment campaign that I've seen in my lifetime, as we just heard in that report. So is this a done deal? We're going to be heading to the polling stations?
Well, it looks like that. Now, there is some thought that Democrats and moderate Republicans in the House of Representatives may be able to erect a wall to keep the constitutional amendment from going through. If it's going to be stopped, that's where it's going to be stopped. But I think most people believe it is going to make it through both houses. It's already passed out of the House Judiciary Committee, and yesterday passed out of the Senate Judiciary Committee. So now it's heading to the floor. I think it will pass out of both houses, but it may be stopped in the House.
But this was going to be, and in that report talking about it being next year on the ballot, this was going to be, they were talking about April of this year. Why the delay now?
Well, they have pushed it off, maybe to build support for what they want to do here, Nick, down the road. You know, the folks who oppose this face a very difficult hurdle in that, you know, what Governor Brownback wants to do is to, appoint these with confirmation from the Senate. That's exactly what happens out in Washington, D.C. The president, gets to name someone, and then the Senate has to confirm that person. Going against that idea, that's a tough argument to make because it's what's happening in Washington, D.C. Governor Brownback doesn't want anything different than what is already being done at a national level. So fighting this is going to be a very tough thing to do.
I would say if this goes to the ballot, it may be one of the most amazing campaigns that Kansas has ever seen, because the conservatives in the state, the Koch brothers, others, will spend hundreds of thousands, Americans for Prosperity, millions of dollars. But the lawyers who like the current system are not hiding their lights under bushels either. And they can be expected to pour hundreds of thousands, millions of dollars into the opposition to a constitutional amendment. So the outcome will be fascinating if it gets on the ballot, because it isn't clear that Kansans may not like the way the judges make their decisions, Nick, but amending the Constitution to hand all of that power over to the governor is going to be a very, very tough sell.
And just to reiterate, this just didn't come out of nowhere. In fact, the people of the state of Kansas have spoken on this. They spoke in 1958. There was a constitutional amendment after a scandal, the triple play. It moved, the constitutional amendment moved through the legislature very rapidly. 1958, it's on the ballot. It passes with 58% of the vote. So this notion that there is no democracy, in some ways democracy has already been interjected in the system. My relatives, your relatives have already said yes to the current system that we have.
And you see a lot more of that, of course, in the bigger report on this, which you can see in the repeat of the local show, 5:30 on Sunday. But Mary, if the goal here is to change the justices on the Court of Appeals and the Supreme Court, by doing this in a constitutional amendment, it would take an awfully long time to actually wait for vacancies on these courts. And then even after that time, we know even at the federal level that you never know what you're going to get when it comes to putting somebody on the court. You don't know if you're going to get the decisions you want.
Absolutely. And this is one of these, be careful what you hope for or what you're pushing for or campaigning for or throwing all your money at in 2013, because it is. I mean, these impacts are long term. And we'll see. I mean, I think the messaging is going to be, really phenomenal and interesting to see how each side pushes it.
But conservatives in Kansas are playing the long game here, Nick.
Yeah.
They're very, very confident of long-term control of the State House and of the governor's office, so I don't think they mind playing that long-term game.
And unlike the federal system, Kansas judges do have to stand for retention. Now, a Kansas judge at the Supreme Court level, appeals court level, there's never been a vote to not retain them. That doesn't mean that all of a sudden you couldn't start having campaigns, as we saw in Iowa last year,
on gay rights, on gay marriage,
to say, you know what? You may not, all of you may have withstood retention heretofore, but that was before we put, I don't know, $500,000 into a campaign to boot you off the bench.
The President of the United States was inaugurated to a second term this week, and the Kansas City figure who got more face time than any other during all the festivities was not even a politician, but a clergyman, the Reverend Adam Hamilton, who leads the Metro's largest congregation, the Church of the Resurrection in Leawood, delivered the sermon at the national inaugural prayer service in front of the President and the rest of the country's governmental leaders.
We Americans say it seldom, but we should say it far more often. Thank you for giving yourselves, for sacrificing, for living in glass houses, for accepting the constant barrage of criticism with very little praise, for being willing to risk everything in order to serve this country. Thank you.
Dave Helling, how did Adam Hamilton get the job? How did he get this gig?
He's developed a national reputation for a sort of a bipartisan, nonpartisan approach to very contentious social issues. He's written books. He has a national stature, so I think the National Press Service reached out to invite him. You know, the name Adam Hamilton probably helped a lot. I mean, if he'd worn a powdered wig, maybe things would have been. I mean, that's just an amazing name. And his sermon was pretty phenomenal, Nick. It was, because that's a very difficult thing to sort of straddle.
But he says the last line, and it was the last line of your story, that unlike any president, he says, we've ever had, Mr. Obama, you have the ability to cast a vision and inspire people. You should have been a preacher. Nobody thought that of any other president, not Bill Clinton, not Abraham Lincoln.
Well, those guys were good, but Barack Obama, if you see him in full flight, Nick, at least during the campaign, he does maybe have a little edge on that.
He overreached a little bit within that one commentary, but he's actually, I mean, he's very good, and he's very good about mixing in current social topics. I've actually attended some of his services.
And very popular. They had 1,500 at his church just to watch the internet.
And that is our Week in Review. Our thanks to our news reviewers. I'm Nick Haynes. From all of us here at KCPT, thanks for spending part of your weekend with us.